Good afternoon. Usually when I get such a warm welcome, I think it's time for me to sit down. My name is Lieutenant Colonel William O'Neill. I'm from Chagrin Falls, Ohio. I was just at the first half of your ceremony and was overwhelmed by the number of people that this fine community has contributed to the defense of this great nation of ours. And I'm humbled to be asked to speak before their crosses. You know, I think Abraham Lincoln probably had it right when he said at Gettysburg, "The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here." And I would like to add to that, because I believe that American history is full of a rich story of citizen soldiers who start out as ordinary people and are asked to do extraordinary things. It all started on Lexington's Green in 1775, when Commander John Parker told his men, all 70 of them, to drop your plowshares, drop your blacksmith tools, drop your carpentry equipment, and come defend our country against 700 well-armed British soldiers. And he told them, stand your ground. Don't fire unless fired upon. But if they mean to have a war, let it begin here. And so was started the American tradition of the citizen soldier, the ordinary person who was asked to do the extraordinary. In our family, it started with my father in 1942. He was a kid from the east side of Cleveland, wrapped up in the Great World War II, and he became an aviator in the Army Air Corps. And I loved it. Even today I can hear him saying it. His favorite military line was, "The first time I saw the Atlantic Ocean, they told me to fly over it." And it's incredible when I look at that history, because they started at Hondo, Texas. They went to New England. They flew down the coast to the Keys. They went to South America, and then they went due east to Africa. For you youngsters, this is before GPS, this is before radar, and this is in radio silence. It is 5 22-year-olds in a single airplane going across the sea to the war. They got there just in time to go from Africa to Italy and to engage in the most famous air battle in the Army Air Corps history. It was called the oil fields of Ploesti. In those oil fields in Romania, a full 1/3 of the oil that was fueling the Nazi war machine was being created. A decision was made to take out the Ploesti oil fields. A 4-star general by the name of Jacob Stewart, a 4-star, came up with the idea to fly from Italy to Romania at treetop level. Look up, folks, that is treetop level. We're talking about B-17s and B-24s coming in at that height to drop their bombs. The result was tragic. It was August 14th of 1943, and the unit was the now famous 773rd Airlift Squadron. Of 177 bombers that went off on the battle, 54 were lost. 5 Congressional Medals of Honor were awarded that day for the bravery of these citizen soldiers that were being ordinary people asked to do extraordinary things. 5 Congressional Medals of Honor were awarded that day, more than any time in the history of our nation. My dear father, First Lieutenant Howard O'Neill, was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross that day, and he ended up in Life magazine with his ship because it had so many bullet holes in it when they came home, it shouldn't have been able to fly. But what followed that was what I think is the phenomenal effect of the citizen soldiers of America. My father came back and went back to the factory at Cleveland Graphite Bronze. He raised a family. He put 3 children through Ohio University. In a sense, he came back to civilian life to raise his family, having defended his nation. In 1967, my father showed that he was a true liberal. He permitted me to choose which branch of the service I was going to join. I disappointed him greatly when I joined the Army because he thought the Air Force was the choice, and I went into the Army. As you heard from the introduction, 7 days after leaving Ohio University, I was on my way to active duty. I ended up in Vietnam. I was awarded the Bronze Star, but today's talk is not about that because I firmly believe what we individuals do is not important. What we collectively do is. Suffice it to say, I led a 10-member unit and we moved around a lot. We were in a place called I Corps and we moved from Phu Bai to Hue to Da Nang and ultimately to a god-awful place called Khe Sanh. My job was to escort the media covering the war, and as a result we had to be in the middle of the war. Tragically, we lost one of our crews. 5 of them died while we were escorting them, including Larry Burroughs, the photographer from Life magazine. And I always feel that there's a poignant connection between me and my father, that he was in Life magazine and I was escorting the people who were creating Life magazine. My missions were a success, and here's why I say that. The 10 people that were with me, we spent a year together and we all came home safe and sound, and by my definition, that's a mission accomplished, and it's one I'm immensely proud of. But I followed in my father's footsteps, and I just became a civilian and went about my life because the Army wasn't my life. Although I joined the Ohio National Guard, commanded the 107th Armored Cavalry Unit in Painesville, and we were awarded the humanitarian service for you old people remembering the blizzard of 77, 78, where we like to think that we saved Ohio. That was the National Guard. You know, there's one part of Vietnam that I think we have to talk about here today, and I think it's important. I'm in this VFW post in Chagrin Falls, and quite frankly, when I'm outside military people, I become somewhat disturbed by the image that we always have, and you've all heard it, about how the Vietnam veterans were not welcomed home properly, and you hear this story about they were spat upon in airports by people. Let me get that clear for everybody here today. I came home through San Francisco, Oakland, Seattle, and Chicago. I was always in uniform. I was never met with anything but dignity and respect by everyone I encountered. I did not take my uniform off until I was safely in the bedroom of my parents' home. And on behalf of my generation to all generations, for you Vietnam veterans who are here today, I want to say to you, welcome home. Welcome home. But I digress, because this is not about me. And as I said, my father's day of glory was in 1943. 60 years later, I found myself performing the most difficult task any military man could possibly do. I was standing on the tarmac of the airport in Youngstown, Ohio. My firstborn son was going off to the war and about to embark onto an airplane. He was also going to take his journey across the Atlantic Ocean. And as a parent, I was nervous but proud. And as a nervous and proud parent, I do what nervous and proud parents do everywhere. I went and found the commanding officer, and I thought it was time for us to have a colonel-to-colonel talk, since he was taking my son with him. And I couldn't think of anything significant to say, so I lapsed into small talk, and I said, you know, Colonel, my dad earned the Distinguished Flying Cross in the United States Air Force. Actually, the United States Army Air Corps, to be correct. And he said, how did he do that? And I said, well, he was with the 773rd at Ploesti, which is the most famous air raid in World War II history. And the colonel had this all-knowing look come over his face, and he says, you know, Colonel O'Neill, I've got a thought to leave with you as your son goes to war. Look up at the tail of the plane is he embarking upon. And there for all to see was the 773rd, and indeed, my son had joined my father's unit and was going to war. I was an immensely proud papa. I can tell you today that Sean came home safe and sound. He also is a citizen soldier today. But you know, enough about the O'Neills. When I gave a speech in Chagrin last year, the colonel asked me, could you keep it to 2 minutes and could you talk about poppies? And I said, I can do that, sir. And that was when I found out why we give out poppies on Memorial Day in honor of these great men and women who died before us. It all started in Flanders Field in World War I. A mighty battle was raging, and the generals and the politicians had decided that a piece of land had to be held at all costs. And hold it they did, even through the use of chemical warfare. And at the end of the battle, it had raged so mightily that the ground before them was red with soldiers' blood. And they didn't have time to remove the wounded, and they buried them where they fell. And there was a surgeon from the Canadian Army that watched the carnage and saved those that he could. And the following spring, he returned to Flanders Field with his surgery unit. And he looked out over the hills where the ground had been blood red the year before, and it was a sea of poppies. They had grown up where the soldiers had been buried in place. And he wrote a poem. His name was Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae, MD, Canadian Army. And I'd like to read his poem to you in closing. In Flanders Field, the poppies blow. Between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place. And in the sky, the larks still bravely singing, fly scarce heard among the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago, we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Field. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from falling hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. For if ye break the faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields. Thank you for your time. We live in extraordinary times. I am certain ordinary people will always rise to the defense of this great nation. God bless you, and God bless America.